Hello, it's September 29th, 2022, and this is the weekly Backdrop Developers Meeting. We get together every week to talk about priorities facing the Backdrop project. We'll do some introductions here. My name is Nate Lampton. I'm Quick Sketch on the internet. I'm core committer and co-founder of the project. And let's do everybody else here. So we've got Luke and Tim.
All right. I am Luke McCormick in San Ramon, California. I'm a web project manager and some other things. And well, I have a interest in doing a bunch of things now. So let's throw it over to Tim, who's muted.
I am Tim Erickson, St. Paul Tim. I am in Deerwood, Minnesota today, and hope to be in Oakland or Berkeley a week from today for Bad Camp. So that's my the excitement.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'm from Oakland. That was the part of my introduction I forgot. Oakland, California. So all three of us are going to be sounds like a bat camp this coming week, which is very exciting. It starts a week from today. It's a Thursday, Friday event. I'm just going to keep talking about Bad Camp just for a little bit here. Bad Camp is historically been a very backdrop strong conference that we have in years past had our big summits there where we've had even multiple day like things that cover backdrop information and training and just discussions, all kinds of things. Bad Camp this year looks like it's a little bit it's a little light, or at least they're trying to go a little bit light with things. It's only a 2-day event, and the venue is a little bit smaller than normal, not its normal location at UC Berkeley. It's at a nearby college instead. It's also very conveniently close to the BART station, so it's in downtown, which makes getting around a lot easier. So anyway, sorry, total tangent there. It's yeah, but we're still doing backdrop focused items during Bad Camp. I think the bulk of it is going to be on Friday. There's a summit in the morning and then a code sprint in the afternoon. There's also a couple of sessions that are being given that cover backdrop that I'm not quite sure when all those things are. I think one of them might be Thursday and the other one might be Friday. So yeah, so lots of things happening in the world of backdrop at Bad Camp. I'm really excited. If anybody else is coming into the area, I'll be very excited to see you. I'll be there as well at the Code Sprint. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to the event. Tim or Luke, you guys want to say other things about Bad Camp, or maybe we talk about the issues separately?
Well, sure, let's do that. But let's just mention this part, which is we are trying to create an online component to the sprint. And at the very minimum, this is going to be, hopefully a Zoom connection and the availability to connect via Zulip. We're going to try and have one or two people. We've got two people that I think are committed that won't be in Oakland for at Bad Camp, but will help facilitate the online component. And so if anybody is not in coming to Bad Camp but would like to participate in that sprint, you'll have an opportunity to join a sprint room and work on stuff. It isn't going to be highly structured, I don't think, but it's at least a chance to sprint while we're and again communicate with us a little bit. So.
And I think the one thing we decided, since we're not sure of a lot of the infrastructure details, is that you can count on there being something on events.backdropcms.org that points to whatever else is going on. So if you're watching us on the internet and you wonder where to go, you can go there, and from there you'll be able to find out what else is possible.
Very good.
That's great. Yeah, also, I would imagine that even inside the room, we'll be using Zulip, our primary chat platform, to communicate with each other. My understanding is that it's a large room and there probably won't be a lot of people, which is, I think, specifically requested. We're still being fairly COVID cautious in my household, at least. So there probably won't be a lot of over your shoulder one-on-one, I'm afraid. But at least we will be able to see each other's faces. So there's something to that. Okay. All right. Let's move through the agenda a little bit, and then we might circle back to the code sprint at the end. Let's see. Community updates. We released a blog post documenting or announcing Backdrop 123. I didn't even realize it until I saw the URL that's abbreviated without the point in it. It's 123. So sounds almost like a product name in itself. Backdrop 123.
That's right.
Anyway, that was released, of course, September 15th. Big thank you, Tim, for authoring that blog post that goes over those announcements. I did also see that my Backdrop sites are reporting new news to the dashboard block announcing 123, as well as Bad Camp, which again, I just find that to be the coolest thing.
As usual, if anybody looks at the blog post and sees any omissions or corrections, let us know.
All right, let's see. And then the Contrib update. This is kind of an interesting topic that we might discuss a little bit more. There are 3 Contrib modules released this week. Twitter filters was released early this week. And then 2 twin modules, token block and node property block, were released together by RG Piano. And Tim was talking about this a little bit before we started recording, that these spun out of another issue. Tim, do you happen to have the issue, or it was a discussion that came up? Where did this come from?
It came up originally in office hours yesterday, and then, but it also, there is an issue in the issue queue. I'm looking for it, but I don't have it handy.
Yeah, I was looking for it too. Let's see, recently updated. Here it is. Provide contexts to custom blocks, issue 5666. What is it? 5666. Yeah, the suggestion here was that it would be really nice when placing a custom block on the node slash percent path if you could pull out the tokens from the node or the properties from the node when you're placing that custom block. The trouble that we have is that there's a limitation right now in the layout API that we have required contexts and no context at all. There's no such thing as like an optional context. There are a lot of code comments saying this is where optional contexts would go, but that portion of the API hasn't been built out yet. And what an optional context would allow you to do is place a custom block, for example, on any old layout page that you just make up, like /home or something like that. But if you placed it on node /percent, it would optionally take the node context and make node tokens available if you wanted to use the same block for multiple purposes or in multiple locations. So the feature request sounded simple, but because it requires an API expansion that takes a lot more effort, RG Piano kind of pivoted approaches and said, well, if we can only have required context, then I can just make a separate block that has a required context of an entity, and then you can use that on node pages, which is 100% a good workaround. So that's where these 2 modules came from. In some ways, token block at least fulfills that. Like, I want to place a custom block on a node-based path, and I want to pull properties out of that node and then render it. There's also, in my opinion, some other benefit to making it a separate block, like you're not incurring the overhead of parsing for tokens unless you place that exact block. So I actually think that it has a little bit of an advantage in that regard as well.
Kevin brought this issue up as following us on YouTube and just posted in Zula, pointing out there's the specific feature request that's tied to that is 3929, which is the adding making the author and date fields available to field blocks and display modes. Is the issue that you just talked about, Nate, required in order to accomplish this goal, or is that a bigger issue?
No, so issue 3929
Yeah.
probably relates to when you place the current, or not current node, when you place oh, actually it is kind of a little bit related. Interesting.
Yeah.
Because when you're working on a node / percent path, so the node context is available, you can place individual fields, but there's not a block
Right.
separate for authoring information because that thing is not a field.
Right.
No,
would we
but
need to solve
that's
that
not
other
a requirement at all.
Okay.
That information is available, and then we could potentially make a block that is specifically the node authoring information. We could also make a block for some other things that are part of the node template but not otherwise accessible, like comments, for example, like comment replies or the comment post box. Like that could also be made into a block if you wanted to move that information around.
Okay.
I'm kind of wondering how far you should take that.
Well, the other place is display modes, right? Like
Mhm.
it seems like so display suites, I believe, provides that functionality right now. But I found it a little bit weird that when I went to create a display mode for a node that I'm not able to place the author and date.
Right.
And I don't know how easy that is to solve. But having one or the other would be helpful. Having both would be really nice.
Yeah. There's another issue. Of course, there's another issue. One issue that I've ran into repeatedly in my recent site build out is the inability for non-fields to have display settings is a major limitation. And yeah, display suite helps with some of that. But it would really be nice if on the manage displays tab of a content type, if things like the title were present on that list of things and you could enable or disable them. And not just enable and disable them, we actually kind of have that right now. But if the settings for the title or other options were present on that managed displays, then you could do all kinds of useful things. And so I think we have a couple of needs there. I think non-fields that you can expose via hook field extra fields. Non-fields right now only have like show or not show, and they really need settings. And if they had settings, then you could do all kinds of things with other things that aren't fields but still display on the page. Beyond that, like the title is like a special use case because the title, you need the option to also like not display the title at the top of the post separate from like moving it around. And I think the way that should work, I'm not even sure there's an issue for this particular thing, but if you look at layouts and the way that layouts work, the title has like separate settings that are like at the top of the or in the layout. You can configure the way the title works, but you also can place a title block. And I'd love it if the manage displays tab also had something similar to that, where the title settings might be above the drag and drop list, and then if you say disable or like show as a field, then it pops up as one of the draggable fields down below. So the title field, instead of like always being able to move it up and down, but it always displaying at the top of the page anyway, like that's confusing. Like it would be really nice if the title, which does need to be treated separately, was given special consideration on that tab. Anyway, I'm just spitballing some dream features here. Yeah, the point is right now we definitely have some limitations, which is fine. And I'm really happy to see that Contrib, is stepping in to fill some of the gaps here. There's also, I also filed another issue. I did a custom bit of code that lets me display the same block that your current or same node that you're currently looking at a second time on the page. And that sounds like it's a definite. It sounds like an edge case, and it probably is. So I've filed an issue against Core, but I'm not sure that it will qualify as like 80%. The situation I was running into is that I wanted to use two display modes at the same time. I had a display mode for the hero section of my page and then a display mode for the body section of my page. And so I used the same node twice with different fields in it, once for the hero and then once for the body. But doing that, if you place the current node again on the page, you could use the same options that Views gives you, which is like, you get a separate option for hide show the title, show links, I think, and maybe the author information. I'm not sure if that's an option in Views, but if you were rendering the entire display mode again, you could control showing those individual properties, like when you say render the whole node.
That's interesting because that ties back into the oh, did we lose you, Nate? You're still there?
No, I'm still here. Sorry.
It's okay. It ties back into the previous issue because I was going to recommend that a solution to the date comment or the date author problem was to create a display mode that showed the date and the author. But it turns out that's not possible. But if that had been possible, I thought you'd be able to put that into a block and put it on the same page with the other field blocks. But I think that's actually, now that I think about it, I don't think that is possible. I don't know that we have a block that will show a display mode of a node, do we?
No, we don't.
Right.
Not the current node with a context.
Right, which is actually what you're trying to solve.
Yes, exactly. Yep. And so it's a strange thing, though. It's like display the current block or current node as a block. It's like kind of a weird arbitrary thing. But it has some other nice things about it, that you could control things outside of just the display mode. You could set other options like Views does.
Right.
But really, the ideal thing would be if the display mode just handled that for you, right? If the display mode did include the submitted by information, the title, the comment settings, the showing of links, all of these things that are outside of the fields. Well, anyway, that's all things that would be nice to have for sure. I don't know. I ran into it so often on my current project. I'm really starting to feel like that's something that should be prioritized personally. So we'll see if that comes to pass. Let's see. Let's move on to other items that we've got. There's a lot of interesting things that have been happening in the issue queue this week. First of all, first one is an acknowledgement and an appreciation to Indigo Zella. GitHub Actions broke twice this week. Once our PHP 5.6 tests stopped working. She filed a pull request to fix the setup of our GitHub Actions runner because something changed upstream, like they upgraded Ubuntu, maybe something happened. And then GitHub realized that they broke a whole bunch of people's stuff, and then they rolled back the change, and then our change broke when the rollback. so then she fixed it again, this time with a condition, so that either way the GitHub does it, it won't break again. So that was issue 5790. Thanks, Indigo Zella, for being on top of fixing our GitHub Actions runners. She's also still working on PHP-CS. I think that pull request for syntax validation still just needs review. I haven't gotten to it. It would be really wonderful, though, because the way that it works is really fantastic. Now it's fully like, if you use tabs instead of spaces, like it's going to put a comment on your pull request saying, hey, you should change this to tabs versus spaces on that line. It's very cool. And I would love to get that in. I'm not quite sure what the peripheral side effects of it will be yet, like if it's going to require us like mass fixing all kinds of stuff. But I think that would be worthwhile, even if it did require that sort of thing. let's see. Anyway, okay. Some other issues that came up. This one is really interesting. 5788. Consider dropping date value caching. IndigoZell opened this up about 10 days ago. And this is related to date fields, that when you create a date field, there is a rather ambiguous setting called cache dates. It's just a checkbox that is on the field creation form. And this option, of those surveyed, there's like 6 people who all came in and said, I've never used this option. I don't know what it does, and it sounds a little bit scary. and we went over and looked at the Contrib module of date in Drupal 7, and they removed this feature, claiming that was unnecessary because of entity caching. But also, a bigger problem is that it broke some time zone handling. That the time zone, I guess, was getting cached along with the date object, and so if you had different people in different time zones, you'd end up with a cache like showing the wrong time zone to incorrect users. So they dropped that feature from the Drupal 7 module. I did some benchmarking on it and found out that this setting really does do something. It really does have a positive impact as far as performance is concerned. However, at the same time, I think that the fact that nobody knows quite what it does, and it does have the potential to cause some bugs if you turn it on, and the fact that Drupal 7 removed it, all pushes me towards like we should take it out of our version of the module too. There's no way that if Drupal 7 would have removed it and we would have ported it, that we would have like added back such an esoteric feature. We probably would have found a way to work it into Contrib or something like that, because it's kind of an edge case, quite honestly. Like it's for situations where you might have thousands of dates displayed on a single page, because that's about the only time where it's going to start making a substantial difference on your website. It's definitely like a measurable difference already. So my testing, I displayed 1,500 dates, and the difference was around like 300 milliseconds. So, I mean, 300 milliseconds doesn't sound like a lot, but it's also 30% of the page load time on this in this situation. So that's like, that's substantial. But anyway, the discussion now is pivoted towards backwards compatibility. Like, can we remove this setting and maintain backwards compatibility? And my take on this is yes, absolutely. We can remove this setting. The only thing that we need to do is, because removing the setting, it shouldn't, in theory, turning it on wouldn't affect the functionality of your site anyway. It should just work the way as it did before, but just faster somehow, or better, or maybe it swaps CPU for memory, but the functionality should be the same. What's actually happening here is that turning it on can cause some bugs sometimes, and so by removing it, we would effectively be fixing a bug. So, I think that like removing it doesn't affect the way that anything works. Like no APIs are affected, no people's content is affected. It's backwards compatible. It's just that if you have a site that displays an incredible number of dates, that some of those pages might start to take longer if you were using that option.
And if it's not cached at some other level, it's like an in-between level of caching, right? Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah. And if it's not cached at another level, like the page cache, if you have the page cache on, then the page cache makes that, irrelevant other than like the initial generation time of that page. Yep.
or CDN
totally.
or varnish or like all those other things.
Yeah, which continues to squeeze the like use cases down, into like less and less, situations where it's truly beneficial. So that's where we are with 5788. I'm really glad that this issue is opened. I think even when we ported date module, Olaf took the lead on porting date module, and I was helping out here and there, and we almost dropped it in the port because it was so weird. But when we're doing these like move modules into core, we have to deal with like settings being added or removed at some point, like very comprehensively, and just like the moving a module into core is such an overwhelming experience already that that a lot of times we just like defer that and say, well, once it's in core, then we can continue to clean it up. And so I think that that's kind of what's happening here. Yeah, do you guys have any other thoughts on that? Okay. I thought that was interesting, a good issue to talk about, policy regarding backwards compatibility. Let's see. In benchmarking that issue, some other things came up. Issue 5800, 5800, and that is this issue called enable static caching on system.date.json. So it turns out that every time we display a date field, it reads a config file from disk every single time. And this showed up when we were benchmarking 1,500 dates on the same page, because suddenly this config file was getting read from disk 3,000 times, like enough that it was like obvious and like bubbling up in the results is like, this is taking up a substantial amount of page processing time. And I'm like, oh, that's not good, because there's absolutely no reason to read the same config file more than once per page request. The settings don't change. So config has a system to prevent files from being read from disk multiple times. However, you need to turn it on. And so that setting about whether or not a config file is read multiple times from disk or not is inside the config file itself. There's a property called config_static. And if that's true, then it statically caches the config file the first time it's read and doesn't read it a second time. So this issue is really pretty straightforward, that we should turn on static caching on this one particular file. However, there's a much larger issue here that static cache setting is not, as Nicosella said, probably not actually documented anywhere. Like, it's just like this invisible setting that can have a severe performance impact on your site. And so there's other follow-up issues that need to be done here. One, we need to document static caching of config files. But two, we should set some reasonable defaults for static caching of config files.
Is there ever a time when you wouldn't want the config file cached?
Yeah, there is, and that's if you're a module that is providing your own caching of your config files, like views. So when you load views or layouts, what actually happens is that views reads all of the views on the entire system, like preps them a little bit, and then puts them into a cache bin that says, here's all of the views on the site. And then it pulls all of them out for efficiency and just says, get my one view. Layouts does the same thing. And so if there's like a database entry for views, and instead of reading the files from disk, it reads them from the database and says, hey, what are my config files, or what are my what are all the views on the site, what are all the layouts on the site, what are all the content types on the site, then you really don't need to also statically cache those config files. It's just duplication at that point. But there is a like kind of an obvious pattern here, and that there's two categories of config files. There's settings config files that are just like, this is my module's settings, where it's just one config file. And then there's these groups of config files that are a bunch of config files that all represent particular types of objects, like content types, views, or layouts. And so the obvious thing is that we have this group property when you define a config file in hook config info. And if group is specified, then caching shouldn't be on by default, which right now it's off by default for everything. And if group is not specified, so it's a single config file, then caching should be turned on by default. So that would be very reasonable default. And then hook config info should also say, like, should also have a property for turn on static caching or not, and ensure that when the config file is saved, it obeys whatever is in hook config info and sets that property. So yeah, I don't know. It's performance related, but I think that if we just made that one simple change, we'd probably even find some core files like systemdate.json that would get affected by this and start turning on their caching, which might save us a couple of disk reads per page in core. What I'm really more concerned about is that doing that might make it so that contrib modules that are doing who knows what, like there could be a lot of situations where contrib module could be in a loop. It's really pretty easy to write a loop where you say for each, items as item, and then inside of the loop you say config underscore get, and you read a config file from disk. If your static caching isn't turned on, then you could potentially read that config file, well, hundreds or thousands of times, with the assumption that it wouldn't be reading from disk every time. And yeah, I think that if we just automatically set some defaults, then we could really perhaps improve performance of contrib modules substantially. Anyway, 5800 is that issue for enable static caching on systemdate.json. It'll probably get spun out into other issues to document and set some defaults as well. Okay, let's see. I've got one last issue here, and this is a shout out to another community member, RG Piano, that he's been working on these batch processes, which the batch system is complicated and pretty hard, and so he started writing batch systems for a request that I had about the Drupal 7 upgrade, that we have a batch for or a queue for assigning file types. Like when we put file module into core, files now all are assigned a type, like a image or video or document. And the update from Drupal 7 just posts a message saying, hey, your files now need to have types, and they're going to be processed on cron jobs. But that processing on cron jobs can take dozens or hundreds of cron runs in order to categorize all your files. He filed an issue or a pull request that makes it so that instead of making that invisible and it just runs on cron jobs, it makes a status report message saying, hey, files need categorization. And then when you click on it, it runs a progress bar and categorizes it all at once. And you can see it actually doing it. It's a really big improvement as far as like seeing the activity of a big process, like as it is happening. I don't have the issue number for that one, but what's spun out of that one was issue 4182, that we have a very similar problem with search results, that when you turn on search module, your site doesn't have an index yet. And so when you turn on search module and search for something, nothing happens, because cron has to be run repeatedly to build the search index of everything on your site. Sorry, my cat's talking to me. And this issue 4182 makes it so that on the search settings page, it tells you 0% of your site has been indexed, or 10%, or however many times cron is run. It tells you the amount of site has been indexed, and then it has a button that says invalidate search index, which is a really funny thing, because if you turn on search module and you want it to work, and there's the settings area that says so much of your site is indexed, if you click invalidate search index, it doesn't continue indexing your site. It wipes out the 10% that you've already done and starts it back over again. and the only way for your search to start doing something is to run cron repeatedly until you get to 100%.
So we should add a label next to that that says, "Don't press this button."
Yeah, actually, I'm not even sure. I mean, I guess you would want to do it maybe because things like modifying display modes and stuff like that doesn't invalidate the search index. If you accidentally had something in the search index you wanted removed, you might invalidate it. Yeah, it's really
I'm just looking at the screenshot, and it's this giant button. Like it.
I know it's not good. So the new change is 4182 changes that invalidate search index button to index search index site instead. And so you click it, and then it gives you a confirmation form, and then if you confirm, then it at that time rebuilds the entire index with a progress bar. And if you didn't have this indexed at all, then it would, actually make it so that search worked. You turn on search module, go to the settings page, index the site, and your search would work right away, as opposed to needing to wait a couple of hours for cron to run enough times for the index to get full, or
What's
just
the worst case? What's the worst case scenario of how long it would take to reindex the search? Like a giant site, how long might that take?
On cron jobs?
No, just interactively.
Interactively, so on my site that I'm testing this on with about 6,000 nodes, I think it took about 10 minutes.
Oh.
Which was it's kind of a long time. 6,000 nodes is not a lot. So a site with 100,000 nodes, hang on, let's what would that be? That'd be that'd be over an hour. Yeah. And so, yeah, that could take a long time. But if you're doing it on cron jobs, and cron, maybe you have your site only to run cron once an hour, which I don't encourage because it affects scheduler. It should be like every 5 minutes. But I mean, in worst case scenarios, it could take weeks to index your site. And that's not good. That's I mean, that's broken.
Yeah. If you have search and you have 100,000 nodes, you would want them indexed. Like you would want to just wait the hour and have it do it.
Yeah, totally. And so I'm a really big fan of this issue 4182. It's been one of these giant WTFs with search module. Like, how do you even just get it working? And so I think that's a huge improvement. It may even be so vital that if you turn on search module and you haven't indexed your site, it might be worth throwing a status report error saying, hey, you need to run search indexing. There's a lot of precedent for other modules doing that, like XML sitemap, for example. If you haven't generated a sitemap, the module isn't working, and it needs a way to surface that, like, hey, you turned on this module, but I'm not actually doing anything because there's no sitemap yet. It throws an error on the status report telling you got to regenerate the sitemap. So very similar kind of like, you turned on this module, but it's not doing anything. There should be some visibility into why. Anyway, that one I'm super excited about. Big thanks RG Piano for working on that, plus the upgrade issue. Both issues, the file upgrade one, I've marked RTBC, but it was my issue originally, so I'm looking for either a second RTBC or another core committer to come in and do the merge on it. Issue 4182 needs some additional testing, I think. And there's some UI questions in there as well about what options we should ask people when they regenerate the search index. I made some suggestions early on and realized that were weird and esoteric, and I made different suggestions. And yeah, it would be really nice to have some some check on like the suggestions and what options we should show people, to make sure that what we're asking is understandable and not confusing. Okay, well, those are the issues that I had to cover for today. Just on a broader level, it's only been 2 weeks now since the release of 123. We're going to start turning towards 124 here pretty soon. Of course, the development branch is already open. But yeah, I think right now we've got a lot of focus on Badcamp next week. But then after Badcamp, we're going to start looking at soliciting for new advocates for new features for 124. Might be time to pull up the old survey again and look at what kinds of things do we think are reasonable for this cycle. And as as always, like there's a lot of things that have been started and are like somewhere between like 1/3 done and like 3/4 done, and so I would like to pick up the ones that haven't that have been started, that haven't been completed. um, Issues like those, someone has put in the work, and they haven't gotten any benefit from it yet. And so I really like picking up the ones that have already been started and trying to get them to completion, and make it so that work doesn't go to waste.
Is there a quick way to find them? I suppose looking through the pull requests is a good way, right? The pull requests on background.org. Or
Yeah, almost always. Actually, it's a good question. How do we find them in mass? I would say look at the survey and the top like 20 items, and then just see which ones of them have pull requests by opening them. Yeah.
How
Sorry,
many?
can you guys hear my cat?
No.
I didn't
Oh,
notice.
okay. He's screaming at me. Okay.
We have 672 open pull requests, just by the way.
Wow.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, that's a lot of work that has been done that needs some attention. Okay. Let's turn the last 10 minutes here to the Bad Camp sprint. It sounds like if we want to focus on the core development or code aspect of the event. I know that our organizer, Irina Zaks, has an agenda, like literally like a personal agenda for this sprint. And that's that she would like upgrading to Backdrop to be easier.
Yeah.
And so that's the focus sort of the sprint, is upgrade process, and either things we can do within core to help that, or new processes or tools that we can add to make that easier. Tim, do you have more information on this? I'm only speaking of this in a vague sense.
I would just say that theme came, I think, partly from the idea of exploring how we can work better with the Drupal community and solve this shared problem, or the shared interest that we have of getting people off of Drupal 7, right? The Drupal community is interested in seeing there be fewer Drupal 7 sites out there. And we're interested in seeing some of them move to Backdrop. And I think that Irina's thought was that would be a good, Bad Camp might be a good place where we could talk about that. And maybe there's some Drupal folks who might want to work with us to really solve a problem for Drupal 7 site owners, which is giving them options. Anyways, so I think that's where she came from, and that, I don't think you meant anything negative by saying it was Irina's agenda, but I think it's a good agenda for us as well. So
it's my agenda too.
Yeah, exactly. We can all go in and say it's our agenda. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's because normally you might say someone with an agenda is like an unfair bias or something, and no, she just has a vision for what she would like to accomplish, and it's a worthy one.
Yes.
I actually want to point out something sort of on a philosophical sense, having come recently from deep in the Drupal 7 upgrading, all that kind of world, is if you talk about agendas, I think this big mass of Drupal 7 sites that we're all like deeply aware of has changed character for the Drupal world. Like up until now, I think the general Drupal group has viewed D7 sites as potential D8 and D9 sites that felt like a commodity. It felt like, oh, this is our oil. We want to mine it for possibilities here. And I feel like they think they've mined it for most of the D8, D9, D10 sites they're going to get out of that. And it's becoming a responsibility to them. I don't think they're viewing it as much as an asset and more as like a a burden, and that might be affecting sort of how they view us. That, like, instead of stealing their resources, we're becoming more a solution to their problem.
Well, I think there's something to that, and I think that's partly what motivated this sprint. So.
Yeah, I mean, in the Dries note in Prague, Dries talked he didn't mention Backdrop, but he mentioned how his father, Dries's father, had one of his patients call him and ask him what to do with their D7 site. And he was saying, it's tough because there's all these organizations that are finding out that the costs to convert it to the latest version that they never budgeted for is as much as it costs to develop in the first place. So anyway, I guess I just said the same thing twice.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting, Dim. I think that your suggestion of like how can we work with the Drupal community, I wonder what that will translate to as far as action is concerned. Like, this sprint, the things that are here's a Google Doc. Sorry, I should have shared this with you guys at the beginning. I'll put it in the agenda as well. But a Google Doc is kind of this is the sprint document actually for all of Badcamp. So there's also some Drupal 10 and feeds functionality that's happening at the same time. But on our side, what we're kind of looking at here is a number of technical solutions to make things easier. There's been a suggestion that Backdrop have a migrate like module that you install Backdrop, have a Backdrop site running, and then you point it at a Drupal 7 database, and then it pulls stuff into that Drupal 7 or into that Backdrop database from your Drupal 7 site. There's a Contrib theme that basically makes it so that your Drupal 7 theme works on Backdrop, which is interesting.
Wait, really?
Yeah, Jen's been working on it. It's called D7 compatible. You make your theme extend the D7 compatible base theme, and then it pre-processes all of the variables to work in the Drupal 7 way.
I've been writing letters to Santa Claus for 5 years asking for that.
I don't think it works yet, Luke, but it's an idea that's been started yet.
Yeah, she's had a fair amount of success with it on a simple site, but yeah, it's because there's only so much that it can do. Like it can deal with the template changes for core, but if modules have also changed, then it starts getting a little complicated. But there's some changes that we made, like the classes variables, for example, now are always an array inside of your templates instead of a string, so you have to do the implode yourself in your template files, and it basically puts that sort of change back. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. And then there's a Drupal 7 module that is the Backdrop upgrade status module that I've seen a number of people use on their Drupal 7 sites to evaluate how ready their site is to move to Backdrop. So those are 3 Contrib solutions, and there's a number of core issues as well that are on the agenda here. But all of this stuff, this is all just making moving to Backdrop easier. I'm not. I'm just not quite sure what to do with the, reconciling with the Drupal community about coming to an agreement or shared ground around getting people off of Drupal 7. I mean, clearly making it easier to move to either of our platforms it helps those Drupal 7 users. And so for the most part, we're pursuing the same goal, even sometimes in similar ways, but in different, with different outcomes. One's ending up on Drupal, one's ending up on Backdrop.
If there's a Backdrop to Drupal transformation process, which I've talked about, then it closes the loop.
Yeah. which which is totally possible.
And we've talked about that before. So yeah,
It's
I
half
mean,
written.
I think that there are some, I don't know that we're going to get any kind of an official statement from Drupal about this, but I think there are definitely people in the Drupal community who would just like to see these Drupal 7 sites have better options and would be willing to, even if they're not backdrop users themselves, and they might be willing to, like add a bad camp type sprint, just come over and help us and say, yeah, we think this could be valuable for both communities, right? One, fewer sites we have to support in Drupal 7. And again, I would keep stressing that, like, the Drupal, it's better for Drupal in terms of your original idea, Nate, which is that if the Drupal community, if a whole bunch of people move to backdrop, then the Drupal community could say, well, we've got 400,000 Drupal 9 sites, but we've also got 100,000 backdrop sites that are very close. Now, obviously, we're a long ways away from that, but if we could say that, I think that would be good for Drupal, right? As opposed to just losing those sites to Wix or WordPress.
Yeah.
So, and I know I don't have to convince you of this because you were writing about this 7 years ago.
Yeah, I would be a big fan of that, but I think that there's been some discussion in our leadership teams. I haven't been a part of them at the PMC level about the Backdrop project has very little interest in relinquishing control of the project back to Drupal's leadership team, because there's an understandable fear that it would be like an acquisition for the purposes of destroying the competitor, a la Figma situation, right? Or
is that why Adobe bought Figma?
I'm just, they have a history of doing that, right? And so that we want to remain independently managed without oversight from the Drupal Association or the Drupal leadership team, because because they have different interests or different motives potentially than we do. But the potential there for better marketing, better collaboration. I think the security team continues to be our closest point of contact. But it would be nice, if they wanted to start counting backdrop sites as Drupal sites, that would be kind of just an interesting thing. I mean, that would be an agreement on our side where, if we changed our generator tag to say, Drupal Classic or whatnot, or backdrop in parentheses, Drupal 7 extended, I don't know, something like that. And then, built with, the site aggregator would start counting those sites as Drupal sites, or maybe Drupal would start reporting them as Drupal sites. That has a marketing benefit to Drupal and to us potentially. But I don't know. just spitballing again.
Lots of trade-offs.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, because then a lot of people coming to us might actually think of us and go to Drupal instead, thinking that they're getting backdrop based on what they'd experienced. They're like, oh yeah, this is Drupal, but it's not really. So yeah.
Okay.
Well, anyway, but again, we do have at least a shared interest in getting people off of Drupal 7. So there's something we can do with that, surely.
Right. That's the hope, but I'm excited to see if we have some interesting conversations at that camp with people. Let's see. Yep. We should wrap up. I just want to quickly mention that we've talked about Bad Camp. 2 weeks later is the next Backdrop Live as well. We really need people to start getting session topics on the schedule. Please get us some session topics, things you want to talk about at Backdrop Live. And 2, start registering. Okay. And that's it. That's all I have to say about that.
Okay. Well, let's wrap up for today. Thanks.
If somebody wanted to talk about that magic theme, let's
next week.
Drupal themes.
Next week, Luke, we're going to make Jen give us a demo.
I will ask Santa then. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again.
Yep, I'll hit